Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this DZone fireside chat on threat detection, core practices to manage risks and vulnerabilities, sponsored by Censys. In a time where cyber threats are not just evolving, but exploding in complexity and scale, robust threat detection mechanisms, they're not a luxury, they're a necessity. The battle against cyber threats is often fraught with challenges, from excessive noise and security alerts to the issue of false positives that slow down investigations and frustrate your teams. How do we navigate these challenges effectively? Today, we have the privilege of being joined by experts in the field who are here to help us untangle the complexity of threat detection and offer some ways for building a lean and highly effective program. Please welcome Morgan Princing. Hey, Morgan. Product Manager at
Nice to be here,
Censys.
Jesse.
Great to have you. And Mike Bailey. Hey, Mike.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Senior Product Marketing Manager at Censys. With years of hands-on experience and in-depth expertise, they've been at the forefront of developing cutting-edge cybersecurity solutions. I'm Jesse, the Chief Technologist here at DZone, and I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. Real quick before we get started, if you find the discussion valuable and want to explore more exciting events like this, head on over to dzone.com/events where you can access all our demand content. Let's jump right in. I want to start off talking about attack surfaces. Right, I started coding back in the 90s, and attack surface back then was really small compared to today. Right now, we have multi-cloud microservice architectures, all kinds of stuff. So if we can, why don't y'all start off and tell us a little bit about why does the attack surface matter so much in threat detection?
Yeah, I'll start here. And it used to be that, the threat and what they're trying to achieve was the most important part of an investigation and remediation process. But now there's this question mark that continues to grow every year. We've seen over 130% growth in attack surfaces just in 1 year, and they continue to grow as companies are investing in getting data from more places, Internet of Things devices. And so now there's this huge question mark, right, of your attack surface.
Mm-hmm.
And so you may not even know you're being attacked. And I think that's sort of what is changing in threat detection is, well, you can't detect a threat if you don't know about the asset and what is happening on it, right? Pretty sound logic there. And we see with our clients sometimes 30%, of their entire attack surface is they did not know about. Sometimes 80%, sometimes 100%, sometimes it doubles. And so it's a really big problem, and it's sort of this foundational thing to threat detection going forward.
So how do we get there, though? Like, how do these blind spots happen?
I can chime in. I mean, I think, Jesse,
Yeah.
you said it right? Like the changes that we're seeing, the digital transformation, everyone's talking about this, right? Is that things are like we've moved to the cloud. We have changed the way that we do business online. And that has turned into companies spinning up services that are more responsive. And it's like, great, we should be championing this, right? Like this is like businesses are able to respond to the needs of business in a lot more of a dynamic way. I can set up a box and kind of have that respond to the needs of how often my website's being hit, how often it's being trafficked, right? I can kind of have all these resources that are there, but they are dynamic, and it's different from when I used to just say, great, I have this set of IP space, I know it, it's defined, I can keep track of it. So as we see a lot more changes in the types of assets that are being spun up with cloud infrastructure and shared infrastructure, we see that there is a lot more unknowns in terms of what you're actually using at any given point in time.
Right.
And it takes a lot of time to investigate that, right? Which is difficult for teams.
It's hard, and I'm assuming we're going to get to more of these solutions, but as we set the stage, it seems like this is a really big issue, right? When I was running a dev team, if I found out that I did not know 80% of the surface, is that a real number? Did y'all make that up? Oh, look at Mike. He's like, nope, it's real. But you don't share. Don't you share who it is? But still,
no, I wish I did. And that was actually from a real estate company. And one of the things that we see that really increases the risk is when there's M&A right? And
Oh, yeah.
what happens is, you acquire a company, you think you have all of their assets or everything sort of mapped out. So the security team usually does an RFP, but there's always dirty laundry. And actually, we've had customers that have used our tool to do M&A, and because of the results they saw, they did not want to incur the risk of some of the companies, and so they have actually shut down M&A because of the data that we provided them. And so it used to be, you could, here's my spreadsheet of what we own, whatever, and it's trust but verify. And so now they come back with their own scan results and say, well, actually, we're seeing this, and like, what are these things, and what are these old assets? And you have all of these services. So think about, you're talking to IT, and they're spinning up new cloud instances, and they're setting up new SaaS applications. Those things fall through the cracks. And that's what we continuously see with clients is they get the list, they get the initial discovery from us, and they go, wait, what is all this? What is all this? Right. And it may be stuff that hasn't been active for 2 years, or the vendor said that they shut it down and they didn't really fully take it offline, and it's still there, putting the company at risk.
It gives me hives. I used to run dev teams, and I can remember when they would spin up test environments, and they would spin up these environments to do builds, and then they leave them running. And we were always concerned about cost. So this is another factor, right, Morgan? I mean, you brought up cloud. So I'm assuming that y'all catch some of that stuff too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite talking points too, is just a clean hygiene is really cost effective. There are so many things where we've seen customers in the past realize, and to Michael's point about M&A, right? Like some of this stuff with these really, large enterprises, there's a lot of cost that's going into supporting some of these servers and this infrastructure that they don't need, or just the number of vendors that they use, whether it be cloud service providers or different types of domain registrars, right? Where it's like somebody's doing business with all of these folks, and there's bundle opportunities. There's just like overhead costs that can be eliminated when you have a little bit of a cleaner attack surface.
And when you have a more complicated attack surface, I mean, cybersecurity criminals, they're getting more savvy, right? They're learning along with the rest of us, from what it seems like, right? So pointing this stuff out seems to be a big deal. Now, who do you think this falls on? Like, who is your primary user? Like, who's in charge of this? For example, would it be a development team? Is it a DevOps team? Is it something in between? I mean, back in the 90s, we even had build engineers. So I can imagine you would have something like that. But now, like, who owns this in the company?
We've seen mostly cybersecurity. There are certain departments where it's more IT focused, and you talk about all the assets that are out there. But I think the interesting thing about what I've seen on customer calls and about customers using it is it starts off with security, right? Taking a look at everything, making sure everything is sort of known and managing the vulnerabilities. But we work so much with all the teams internally. Like you said, engineering managers, DevOps, pretty much across the business, IT, and even the companies like that have marketing departments that are doing all this MarTech stuff and implementing e-commerce applications, and bringing those services to life to create those customer experiences. You start to see how it becomes a lot bigger than you realize, right? Because there's hundreds of SaaS applications on average being used by a business. And so having those eyes and saying, hey, this is, your asset, you're in charge of this. Security wants to make sure that you have everything up to date, right? That there are no vulnerabilities here. And so they're working very collaboratively across the company. But security is usually the central core of that motion.
Got it. So at the center, but team effort. What you got, Morgan?
I was just about to say, I'm sorry. That reminded me, though, of a funny story of, I was one of my favorite security professionals I've ever worked with. When I started the job, he kind of met me and said, hey, I'm glad you started, right? But like, welcome to the security team. And, I was at this point, like on a professional services team, right? Like doing something very different. And it's like every single person in this day and age is now part of the security team. And as you had just mentioned, Michael, like so much of this attack surface is not just one team's problem, and especially when it comes to managing threats and in detection, right, is like it's becoming the entire org, and we need to make sure we're proliferating across those teams. So we're all part of the security team here. And
great. Yeah, that's what I get excited about, because we need to, hopefully for all the viewers out there, we are going to be telling all of you how you can keep up with these changes, how you can find them, how you can experience all that. So as we move on, another question, like what are kind of the common problems that you're hearing across your customers about managing their exposure and detecting threats? Like, what are the trends?
So imagine I come to you and I'm in security.
Okay.
I say, hey, what is this service? Why do you have this? This isn't sanctioned by the company, doesn't follow the processes. And you go, that is not our service. What are you talking about? That immediately destroys confidence. And frankly, that is what we've been seeing mostly in exposure management, is it's not built on solid data. And so you can imagine the frustration that creates with customers to see things that are part of their attack surface or are vulnerable, but are not actually owned by the company. And that is what we see a lot with customers. And so much so that they're just going out and buying solutions. There's all these people that are claiming to do attack surface management, and people are buying multiple solutions hoping to fill all the gaps, which is just not a great strategy. And some customers that haven't done it, there's a significant portion of customers that haven't done ASM or exposure management completely, they're afraid to open Pandora's box. And I don't blame them, right? Like they
don't
are
want to know
enough going on with vulnerabilities and every other project and the cloud security consoles they use. And so they're looking at all this disparate data, trying to piece it together, getting all this noise in the process. And it's really frustrating to them. And I think that is hurting the confidence and hurting the space, frankly.
Yeah, they want plausible deniability. That's
correct. They want to know for sure before they go to their boss or the chief financial officer or whoever it is, and be like, with confidence, we can say this is your assets and this is some of the things that you need to be doing with them.
Yeah, that I can understand. That seems kind of scary. Morgan, what about from your side? What do you see?
Yeah, I think a lot of our customers, in addition to some of the challenges that Michael was saying around some of the false positives or some of the just wanting to not know, right? There's also some questions here about just how do we make it actionable? How do we make sure we're keeping on top of the latest threats too, right? And back to that changing piece, exposures last year don't look the same as exposures this year. And the types of things that threat actors are going after are also constantly changing. So I do think that we are hearing a lot of that, and a lot of our customers are most excited when we are responding to the nature of the market, right? And are responding to saying, hey, there's this happened yesterday. Like we are on the dot today about you need to be looking for this in your attack surface right now, and we're scanning for it immediately and really kind of responding to that real-time nature of the world we're living in, right? So we see that a lot too.
Awesome. And I want to talk a minute, because just about every talk that we've been doing lately, we talk about false positives, right? It's an issue. I'm just going to say it's an issue. Developers are at their wits' end, getting called 2:00 in the morning, alarm bells going off. They're getting out of bed. They're losing sleep. It's wreaking, havoc on their productivity, on their health and their family. So how do we improve? We've got the data accuracy piece. I get the tracking of the data, but how do we improve that and reduce our false positives at the same time? Because some of these teams are sitting around looking, they're saying, well, I've got all these false positives. Now, granted, Mike was saying some of them are probably putting together 3 or 4 pieces of software and they're got integration problems. And I got that. But how can we improve this and get the health and our team's trust back?
Test. I mean, you shouldn't trust it coming from me that I say, our data is the best, or any vendor says our data is the best, we're the most accurate.
There you go.
You should put it to the test. And I think this is something that's been really interesting in the exposure management and attack surface space, is people view it as almost like a checkbox, right? We can go, oh, we already use this vendor, we'll just get that solution from them. Really, you should be looking at and doing proofs of concepts and proofs with a few vendors, because you're going to see where they're maybe strong and where they're maybe weaker, and what visibility they don't have access to, like a cloud, for instance, like if they don't have a cloud connector for if you have Google, Amazon, Microsoft Azure, for instance. And so I think it's really important in that process to not just go through like an RFP, not just trust the vendor because you've been using them for something else. Put it to the test and really get a better understanding of your attack surface and go through those results, and see what matches up and what doesn't, and ask questions to the vendor about how often are they scanning, what ports are they looking at, what data are they getting and gathering and comparing them. Because what's happening is this is going to become a foundational piece of how you do threat detection going forward. More and more, you're going to have this exposure management data integrated into it. Gartner sees it. They expect 60% of TDIR investigations by 2026 are going to involve the data from exposure management versus 5% today.
It's huge.
So you need to make sure that you're paying attention to this space and not just going with the first solution that comes to you.
Awesome. Morgan?
Yeah, I'll just add, I think right now what I'm also seeing with some enterprises is there's a little bit of growing that we are seeing in, like, a lot of companies are really used to testing risk data, right? Or they might have a triage process where they revalidate a risk, which is really awesome and important. With attack surface management, though, in this continued evolving space of what's yours on the internet, there's also a workflow here of like the ownership piece, right? Like, how do we have that second line of validation, right? Like, as vendors, we are trying to say, we think you own this. There's pieces of this that look like it's yours. And I think we also need to kind of like meet that and say, like, how do we answer that question, right? Like, and in the same way that you might triage a risk and validate if it's still there, you might have your process where you rescan things. There's also this like process of what do I do internally to help like validate ownership? And those are hard. It's like two sides of a coin. We're trying to like present the right data to make sure that that's there for them. And we also are seeing some of the most successful companies that have processes almost that go into place to say, like, who owns this in my organization? And they get really good at that. And that's a muscle that is like a newer muscle. I think we're still flexing.
I like that. I'm a process guy. Love it. So
Yeah,
all of you out there, pay attention. Process is part of it. And I also like the testing and the validation. That's a big thing. For Mike to say, don't just trust us, right? Validate it, test it, look at the underlying data. We used to do a lot of database analysis, and we would always say we like it because the data doesn't usually lie to us. It just is, right? So that's a great point. I love it. We're going to be approaching 20 minutes. I know y'all want some time to dig into some other things, but I did want to know, right, as we're out here, these cybersecurity criminals, they're playing with AI. AI is everywhere. I want to know a little bit about where we're going. Like, what are the future trends and technologies that we see coming in attack surface management? It's going to get to the point where the humans are going to get overwhelmed, right? This stuff is super complicated. The stuff that I was using back in the 90s, the programmers nowadays, they have to know that and 50 million other things, right? So the stuff that we're piling on just keeps more and more and more on these teams. So how do we keep up? And is there anything that we can leverage there? What do you think? Morgan, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I mean, this is a hot topic, and certainly, right? Like, I mean, all new technologies we're growing. We're going to make sure that there's always some resistance, I think, in cyber to AI and just the level of complexity and how mission critical it is, right? You want to reduce false positives, and sometimes that black box nature makes it a little bit uncomfortable. But there are lots of places where you can put that in just the right spot. So, one area that we are thinking about this a lot is some of the tasks. Like, we have a large repository of internet-wide scan data, right? And you can ask lots of great questions of it, but there is some syntax that you can, develop to try to ask questions. And that can be challenging for people to learn. And going back to like security engineers and engineers in general have their hair on fire, and we are trying to help that in all causes. So one place we can help, right, is to say, like, why don't we help you using some AI that we kind of, we have a Censys GPT product that you can ask questions. It will spit out syntax to basically translate those questions into a query that you can do to search our internet search product. So we're trying to say like that is a value add. It's not right now like mission critical, but it certainly helps you like increase efficiencies. And we're trying to like be in that sweet spot to help, but also make sure we're keeping accurate in terms of how we're leveraging AI right now.
That's awesome. That sounds cool. Are you using the
Yeah.
ChatGPT engine to filter and do work there? Or, yeah, that's awesome.
We are.
That's cool. All right. I like that.
Yeah.
All right, Mike, anything you want to add in there?
Censys GPT is phenomenal. And
It is.
as a non-security professional, I really used it to get to know it and understand the syntax a little bit better, so I can support customers and really kind of dig into the product a lot more.
Yeah.
I would say the other area that we put a lot of investment into is we just released something called predictive scanning. So now we're predicting where services will be across a 65,000 port range. And we're doing that continuously. And so we're seeing services that live over here, or autonomous systems that are only using hosts with services on, this port. And so we've gotten a lot faster at detecting those things on non-standard ports and predicting where they're going to pop up based off of vendor user activity, and all sorts of other data that we're gathering by doing the crawls across 65,000 ports and then using that data to predictively scan and get faster. And so that is where we've invested a lot, and we continue to invest in that just because what we've seen is that most services now are on non-standard ports. You used to think HTTP would be on 80 and with SSL it would be on 443, but now it's just across the board. And we pulled research showing that over 60% of the services are living on non-standard ports.
Really?
Okay. Yeah. And so, you're seeing Internet of Things blow up, right? And they're all going on non-standard ports, and all these new services are going on non-standard ports. Vendors are choosing them. And so we need to be attuned to that, right? And build technology to adapt to that and predict where those things are going to pop up.
Predicting them, catching them, and then telling people so that they know what they're actually releasing. That's cool. I like it. All right. Well, we got a few minutes left. I wanted to leave some time to dig into some real world examples, right? Some real use cases where organizations really did stuff. So why don't y'all kick us off and give us some real examples of people who have, been successful with managing their threat detection and this minimization of the attack surface.
So starting around slide 9 here. So we'll talk a little bit about exposure management. And like I said, this is part of that threat detection ecosystem in lots of ways, making sure that customers and, your program is supercharged with the data that you have, right? Of what is actually yours, what do you need to make sure you're protecting, and then layering on the threat detection on top of that. So we see a lot of folks connect this in, with a lot of their other tools, right? And one of these ways in which as we accumulate and kind of identify your attack surface, we are also looking for different risks that might be posed on those assets, right? So both in terms of kind of exposures, which might be something like an SMB service that could be exposed. And this is actually an example we had from a customer where they had a German manufacturing division, right, that they kind of were monitoring, and there was an SMB service that was exposed on one of their IPs. And we want to really make sure that we kind of provide some of that important history, right, and kind of tracking this as we're scanning really frequently and being able to say, great, look at this has been open and closed over a sequence of time, and give you some details about when we last saw that. When we look at this, though, a lot of what we see folks wanting to understand, right, is especially in the threat detection space, in our point about false positives and understanding this, right, is some context is usually really helpful, and it prevents folks from having to go out and say, like, I need to go grab more information. The fewer stops you need to make, hopefully the easier and like faster you can get to kind of actually responding and triaging to this, right? So we want to provide really specific details from what we've seen in the scan. It can include things like, target names that are there for the logs, right? Or certain versions of SMB to understand specific risks that you might be incurring.
That's really cool.
The other Yeah, it's fun. We're walking through this a lot, but a lot of what also we want to make sure you can do is rescan those services. So even though we're scanning the internet in a lot of these services, we're touching more like twice a day sometimes.
Okay.
You might also want to like update this more frequently, right? So if you need to immediately rescan, we do have some ways you can put that to the top of the queue and say, great, show me what's on the service right now, right? Like, has anything changed?
And I like
So we
how
always
you
recommend
can,
that as a
yeah, you've
yeah,
got the JSON part of the data on the scans. So you
we
can
do.
copy it. Every DevOps and developer in the world is going to love that button. And the fact that you can download it, you can save it off, you could put it as part of something else as an input. I think that's pretty cool.
As part of a ticket, right? Yeah. So there's all these workflow pieces that are really
Yeah.
important that we want to, make sure is easy as we're connecting this into other pieces.
Yeah. And it ties back into the thing we said before where process matters, right? Whatever
Yeah.
products we're choosing to help us do this, we need to make sure it can fit into workflows that work for us and our team, right? I
Oh,
love how that works.
100%.
Awesome.
100%. Yes. And so, the other thing we see a lot too is like these are part of, we have got MITRE ATT&CK here and we see a lot of these exposures start to relate to larger themes, right? If you're investigating something where SMB is oftentimes a part of a lateral movement technique, right? And so we want to make sure you've got data that's available that can help you tell that larger story around threats that you might be investigating in your organization and start to correlate some of those time logs, right? To try to see like, was this part of a more sophisticated attack that was conducted against the business?
Yeah.
Is this potentially something where we had seen, some of these areas move laterally, right? And so a lot of that we want to be tying in as well.
Yeah. And some of those larger services that manage your logs, you take your logs, you load them up there. And then when you look at what happens at this time, it'll show you in context of everything else. I like it.
Yeah.
I think it's cool.
Yeah,
All
exactly.
right, good example.
So that's a good small, easy way you can kind of use some of that risk data from the exposure management and tie that into some of the larger processes you might be doing.
Awesome. I love it. All right, Mike, what you got?
So my product is it's called Censys Search, and we talked about Censys GPT, which is basically just the thing that can generate the query for you. But I think what's amazing about Censys Search is we talked about the scan data and how we're scanning so much, so frequently, looking across all 65,000 ports. And what I think is phenomenal is we have over 2,000 fields that we're gathering data about, right?
Okay.
So we're looking at location, we're looking at the services, we're looking at the connections. What host is tied to what certificate is tied to what domain. We're looking at the history. And you can sometimes go through these, if you just pop in a host and Censys Search, you can see like minute by minute detail of what is changing, right? It goes online, this changes, these fields change. Like you said, you can download all the granular data. You can look at the WHOIS information. Actually, just last week, we released something called Web Technologies. And so we're tracking all these different categories of software. So if you want to look, for instance, at Salesforce instances, or you want to look at an e-commerce plugin or a certain CDN vendor, right? And use that, you can do that with Censys Search and get really granular detail. And the one example that I showed on slide 14, if you were to go into that, slide 15 shows somebody from Twitter, a threat researcher, who used Censys to identify that IP as have a command and control infrastructure. And they did that by looking at the postal code and the organization details. So the organization was called TechCo, which is a little sus, right? And
yes, definitely.
so they, that's the kind of investigations you can do where if you see an IP, rather than maybe going down this rabbit hole, you could look at Censys and say, oh, it actually changed, right? Or, oh, it's related to this certificate. What is this certificate related to, right? Otherwise, that's maybe running right now versus running yesterday and not today. And so it'll help you, it'll provide all that context so that you don't get, stuck on something or go down this rabbit hole when there's nothing there because it changed yesterday. Or it'll provide that connections of like, wait a second, what is this here? How is this connected to this? Why is this connected to this domain? And really help you in investigations kind of go back and get an understanding of what the true malicious IP service, etc., is.
Yeah, and it's cool because as I'm looking at it, and you all will be able to see it right here, but it's flagged as historical. It has where you can see the latest, so you can jump back and forth and trace. Way better than Traceroute for those of you out there who are old like me. The geographic location, giving you the city, giving you the IP address, the fingerprint IDs, all of that kind of stuff. We're having it right there in front of you as you're trying to figure this stuff out. Super important. I can see where people would enjoy using something like that for sure. That's
I'll also
awesome.
just add, I think some of our customers, there's obviously the offensive and defensive sides of security, but we see a lot of customers who are really being proactive in using this internet-wide scan data to start to fingerprint and identify these signatures, right, of adversaries that might oftentimes attack them, right? If you're in the banking industry, you know that there are certain groups that are oftentimes targeting financial institutions, right? And so we've seen a lot of them spend time by trying to proactively monitor and identify that infrastructure that belongs to those groups, and then use that to proactively do some blocking of threats, right? Or having different experiences to try to protect against some of their assets there.
Awesome. All right, I'm sold. Mike, Morgan, how do I give it a shot? How do I try it? What do I do?
It's gpt.censys, CENSYS, .io, or you can just type in Censys GPT into your favorite search engine and it'll pop up, I'm sure. And you don't need to know any syntax. If you've used Shodan before or another service, you can put in that query and it'll translate it for you. And also, if you maybe have people on your team or you yourself don't know English well, or you know a different language, this is translating Russian, Chinese, so you can go wild with it. It can be pretty much in any language you want, and we'll figure it out.
That's awesome. All right, before we wrap up, go. I'm going to give y'all one more shot. Morgan, say what you're going to say. I got one more question for y'all after that.
Oh, no worries. No, I was just going to say, let us know if anyone has questions too, or wants to see the exposure management in works. You can always reach out to us too, and we'll give you a demo with your data if you want. So, other plug if people are interested.
Awesome. I love a plug at the end. Now, one of the things that we want is we want to leave everybody with something they can take away. So when you think through all of your examples and all the people that you've helped so far, and if I'm sitting here watching this and I want to go back to my team and I want to get started on reducing attack surface, analyzing it, getting the right data, where do I start? Right? So what is that one thing you want to leave everybody with before we end our time today?
I guess where I would leave it is, Gartner has this process they call CTEM, the Continuous Threat Exposure Management, and that scoping and discovery part of that process, and understanding what is there is by far the most important, because all the other steps will fall apart if you don't have accurate data. So doing some validation about the attack surface data you have today being enough and really covering using free tools like ours to validate that it is actually yours, right? If you're looking at, take a random result in your attack surface dashboard and plug it in and look at a few more and do some digging, because that's the number one problem that we see, is that the attack surface is not actually the attack surface.
Interesting. Okay. Morgan, what about you?
Yeah, and if you are not already using attack surface management or exposure management tools today, my recommendation is you can go to our free product, as Michael said, right? We give certain number of free queries a month to look at our internet-wide scan data. So you can go to search.censys.io and just type in your organization name, right? You can return back a lot of data that we are kind of just queuing in, and we've got plenty more. We assemble your attack surface by a lot of different tips and tricks here, but you can at least get some visibility there and see what you know, right? Like, I would say that's a good first step, is just to start to kind of correlate that. And if you want to have more discussions, we're always welcome, here for that. But that might be a good first step, is start to do that reconnaissance on what does it look like from an attacker's point of view in terms of assets that your organization might own.
That's fantastic. Well, Morgan, Mike, thank you all both for being here today and for sharing so many of your examples and a little bit of wisdom at the end for helping people get started. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. We had a great, insightful chat going deep into the complexities and challenges of threat detection and attack surface management. Everything from understanding why the attack surface matters to discussing common problems that organizations face, even going into envisioning these future trends that you can try today, actually. We've covered a broad spectrum of issues that are critical in today's ever-changing cybersecurity landscape. So want to thank you both again for joining us and to Censys for sponsoring this event. Your perspectives really helped, I think, equip people with some actionable next steps and key strategies that they can take away to make their cybersecurity situation and attack surface area shrink in their own environments, which I think is great. So if you found today's discussion valuable and you want to share or explore more exciting events just like this, head on over to dzone.com/events where you can access all of our on-demand content. Thanks once again for watching and stay secure out there.